Okay, come on. No, quickly.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Manapira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Munatira Vanachari Munatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So today we'll go through 6.18, but because there wasn't any class yesterday, I'll just read out 6.17 and then go to 6.18. So the translation for 6.17 is, he who is regulated in his habits of eating, sleeping, recreation and work can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. Bhagavad Gita 6.18 Yada viniyatam chittam Atmanyeva vatishtate Nispriha sarvakamebhyo Yukta ityuchyate tada. Word for word. Yada. When. Viniyatam. Particularly disciplined. Chittam. The mind and its activities. Atmani. In the transcendence. Eva. Certainly. avatishtate, becomes situated, nispriha, devoid of desire, sarva, for all kinds of kamibhya, material sense gratification, yukta, well situated in yoga, iti, thus, uchyate, is said to be, tada, at that time. It's Bhagavad Gita 6.18. So translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When the yogi, by practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to be well established in yoga. Purport. The activities of the yogi are distinguished from those of an ordinary person by his character, cessation from all kinds of material desires, of which sex is the chief. A perfect yogi is so well disciplined in the activities of the mind that it can no longer be disturbed by any kind of material desire. This perfectional state can automatically be attained by persons in Krishna consciousness, as stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 9.14.18 to 20. Sarve mana Krishna padara vindayor vachamsi vaikunta gunanu varnane karo harir mandira marjanadishu shrutim chakara chuta satkatotaye bukandalingalaya darshane trisho tadbritya gatra sparshenka sangamam grihnam chatatpada saroja sorabhe Srimad Tulasya Rasanam Tat Arpite Padau Hare Kshetra Padanu Sarpanae Shiro Rishikesha Padabi Vandane Kamam Chadasye Natu Kama Kamyaya Yathotama Shloka Jana Shrayarati. King Ambarish first of all engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then, one after another, he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hands in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental form of the Lord, his body in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of smell in smelling the scents of the lotus flowers offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to places of pilgrimage and the temple of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. This transcendental stage may be inexpressible subjectively by the followers of the impersonalist path, but it becomes very easy and practical for a person in Krishna consciousness, as is apparent in the above description of the engagements of Maharaj Ambarish. Unless the mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord by constant remembrance, such transcendental engagements are not practical. In the devotional service of the Lord, therefore, these prescribed activities are called archana, or engaging all the senses in the service of the Lord. The senses and the mind require engagements. Simple abnegation is not practical. Therefore, for people in general, especially those who are not in the renounced order of life, transcendental engagement of the senses and the mind as described above is a perfect process for transcendental achievement, which is called yukta in the Bhagavad Gita. Om Jnanatimrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnawamascha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadhvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamascha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhyubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha namo vishnupadaya krishna prishtaya bhutale shrimate bhaktivedanta swami nityanamine namaste saraswati deve gauravani pracharine nirvishesha shunyavadi paschatya deshatarine jaya shri krishna chaitanya prabhu nityananda shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you for joining class today. I shall seek both of your blessings and also everybody online, which, okay, I think the position changed, but that's okay. To be able to actually speak something that is meaningful and that resonates with everyone on their journey in Krishna consciousness. And even if you're not in Krishna consciousness yet, then maybe something of value to help you understand the benefits of Bhakti Yoga. So I guess another big thing for me personally, just please bless me that I can understand and reflect the fact that this is not me speaking, this is Vyasadeva using me as an instrument to speak. So something that Prabhu had shared previously. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I will go through the translation again and start unpicking it. So 6.18, when the yogi by practice of yoga disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to be well established in yoga. So right off the back, Krishna in this verse is describing how there is some form of a hierarchy in yoga, some form of an end goal that people want to reach to, right? Because there's progression, there's a growth. As he said already, it's a practice of yoga, so it's not that you already know it or you don't know it, right? So you practice it, so there's growth already implied in that aspect of practice. And then the fact that he at the end is mentioned well established in yoga, that implies in some way that there is some sort of end goal, because you won't be well situated if you don't have a goal in mind. You won't just commit to something and then that's it, You'll actually want to get somewhere in that sort of progression. So right off the back, Krishna's kind of given us in the middle of chapter 6 that there is some sort of progression in yoga. And the natural question then is, what is the goal of yoga? What is the topmost yoga? In Bhagavad Gita 6.47, Krishna describes, the topmost yogi to be in Bhakti Yogi. So, yoginam api sarvesham madgatena antaratmanaha shadavam bhajate yomam samayukta tamumataha. The topmost yogi, paraphrasing, is one who is always thinking of Krishna, who is... I'm going to have to check that out. So the actual translation is, and of all yogis, the one who with great faith always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga, and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So right there, at the end of chapter 6, the build-up to that verse is taking place. He's going through that process of, okay, one yoga to the next yoga to the next yoga. And in 6.47, he's established that the topmost is Bhakti Yoga, because Bhakti Yoga, by definition, is always remembering Krishna, is always acting, pursuing remembrance of Krishna, serving Krishna in that loving sort of relationship. In this verse of 6.18, Krishna is always also talking about the whole aspect of disciplining his mental activities. So if we look at Bhagavad Gita 3.42 and 3.43, we can actually see another sort of progression. It's the aspect of the horses, and let me just show the picture for you. It's this whole aspect of seeing the 5 horses as the senses, the reins as the mind, the charioteer as the intelligence, then the passenger as the soul, and then the chariot itself is the body. So if I read the translation for 3.42, the working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses, intelligence is still higher than the mind, and he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. So from that, we can kind of see that the whole aspect of disciplining the mind is not just a simple aspect of, okay, we think about the mind, okay, how do we control it? We have to think about the whole hierarchy. So why do we actually want to control the mind when we're practicing yoga? The aspect here is that our senses, taking the analogy of the chariot, the horses are the five senses. Each sense sometimes wants to go in its different directions. Sometimes you might smell a flower. Oh, I want to go there and smell the flower. That's what that horse is just deciding. But one horse being the sense of taste. Oh, there's a cake over there, or pizza, whatever you desire. That horse is trying to go in that direction. So we can see that each of our senses are trying to go in different directions. But what holds them in place, what keeps them directed, is the mind, are the reins, right? If the reins are there in place, then they can take control of the senses. But I'm sure we've all experienced this. The mind itself is very chanchal as well. Chanchal meaning very flickering and very unsteady. So if the mind is unsteady, then sure, your senses, you might have controlled the senses, but your mind is thinking, oh, I want to go and enjoy in that direction. Okay, then you direct all the senses there, but then the next moment you already think, oh, you know what, I don't really like this anymore. I want to go and enjoy with that person over there. Or go and skydive and then go kart racing or bungee jumping or whatever happens to be. We're very unsteady when it comes to the mind. So how do you control the mind then? That's where the intelligence comes in to give us that act of that understanding of how to discriminate. So with intelligence we can say, okay, I've studied this, I've read this, and mind, hold on a second, I know you want to go and do skydiving, I know you want to do all these different things, but actually what's better for me is to do this. Right, so that's where the mind comes in and the whole aspect of discrimination. But then the question rises, well, what knowledge do we attain that is actually beneficial for us? And that's where the aspect of the soul comes in, whereby by nature the soul wants to go back to its original constitutional position. You can describe it as the whole aspect of water, ice, where sure, water can change into ice, but the constitutional position of that ice, that water, is to always be water, be very liquidy. Even if you keep it as ice, you leave it out, it will naturally go into water, it will naturally melt, because the natural position in this material world is for it to be liquidy. So with that in mind, then you have to think about, okay, what is actually beneficial to the soul, right? How should the soul be directing the intelligence to understand how to discriminate? And the whole aspect here is that to understand what we need to discriminate, we need to understand how we can come to that intelligence of discrimination. And that we need to see from an understanding of somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, right? So if I go to 3.43, Bhagavad Gita 3.43, and read the translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So from this verse, we can actually understand that, okay, and we can even contemplate over this. Our senses want to go in different directions because they have certain lustful desires. And when we talk about lust, it's not just talking about sexual agitation, it's talking about any sort of material sort of desires. So the sense of smells or sense of flower, it wants to go in that direction. Taste, pizzas, cakes, gulab jamuns, ISKCON bullets, it wants to go there. So all these different senses have different directions that one go in. But then even the mind has different desires. Oh yeah, taking very raw sort of examples. You see somebody, you want to get to know them, you want to invest time in them because you want to develop a relationship with them. Or sometimes you might just enjoy the activities of skydiving and stuff. You want thrills in life. Maybe you want to go to the clubs, pubs, etc., etc. So the mind is very fickle. And so, as based on 3.43, to control that, we need to have deliberate spiritual intelligence. What is spiritual intelligence? Spiritual intelligence can only really come from from knowledge that comes from the spiritual world as well. And something like the Bhagavad Gita, which is considered to be actually a manual of life for us. It's not based on specific religions. It's not based on caste, creed, or anything like that. In fact, if you read it, even just the translations, you can see that it's just going through a life of somebody who's having dilemmas, who's reaching out to somebody who is beyond these dilemmas for answers on understanding how he should act. So with that in mind, what we really need to think about here is how we can overcome those material desires as well. Because if we go back to verse 6.18, which is the class for today, Krishna is also talking about how become situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires. So the whole aspect here is that we need to try and elevate our consciousness, elevate our intelligence to that spiritual platform so that we can overcome the material desires. And in that way, our mind can be controlled by the determination of intelligence. Right? So when we think about devoid of all material desires, one verse actually comes to mind straight away, which is that Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanavritam anukulyena krishnanu shilanam bhaktiruttama. So this is from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and also say in CC Madhya 19.167. When first-class devotional service develops, one must be devoid of all material desires, knowledge obtained by monastic philosophy and fruit of action. The devotee must constantly serve Krishna favorably as Krishna desires. So the question here is, how do we develop that devoid of material desires aspect? And very clearly in this verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, even though it's specifically calling out first-class devotional service, it kind of gives us that hint on how we can develop that devoidness of material desires, or how we can overcome those material desires. And the aspect here is that simply by following the process of Krishna consciousness sincerely, we can actually come to a point whereby one day, in this lifetime, next lifetime, depending on how sincere we are, we can come to a stage of becoming first-class devotees as well, and have that first-class devotional service. And then naturally, we will be devoid of material desires, knowledge obtained by monastic philosophy and fruit of actions. But the only thing we have to do is serve Krishna constantly and favorably the way Krishna wants us to. Oftentimes, at least, especially in my case, right, I'll talk about Jamnashtami celebrations and the whole lead up to it. Service-wise, I love driving. I don't know, Shivam Prabhu does too. And since we're on the fields, we get to drive the truck a lot. But how much of that am I actually being conscious of Krishna, in the sense that Krishna wants me to drive, therefore I'm driving for service, versus I'm enjoying this driving, therefore I'm trying to put myself in situations and positions that I can be the driver in those positions. But naturally over time, as we mature more, as we actually go deeper in our Krishna consciousness, as we go deeper in our desire to develop that relationship with Krishna, with the devotees, with the service, as we mature in general as human beings, and in general, we'll start seeing, okay, I have that desire, but it's, what's so special about driving, What's so special about certain desires that we have? And if we think about it in hindsight, then all these desires that we have are very temporary. Take the Topmost, which is explained in the 6.18 purport as well by Srila Prabhupada. Sex is the chief. Sex is the chief desire. Now, if we think about it, then it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour worth of pleasure. But then what? Then you have a whole period of suffering anyway. You have to, go through the whole aspect of raising a child. Okay, you might not see it as suffering, but there's so much involvement there that it's actually more effort than it is enjoyment. And I'm sure Achyuta Guraparama Prabhu could comment on that. But yeah, so there's that aspect. Or even if you look at the driving aspect, it does take a toll on you to drive for a fair amount of time. 5-10 minutes is fine, but then as you keep doing it, as you keep engaging in that desire, you start realizing that actually, your legs are hurting, your knees are hurting. If I give an example, my dad, he used to drive minicabs, he used to drive lorries and trucks, but he'd always complain about his knee problems because he'd always have to put that foot pedal down. So all these things in the material world that we think are enjoyment, right, the material desires, actually lead to suffering in some way, shape or form in the end anyway. So if I go through the purport as well, so further on in 6.18, Srila Prabhupada talks about the whole example of King Ambarish. And the whole aspect here is how King Ambarish, in his time and age, he was able to purify all his senses so that all these material desires that he had, he could still utilize all his material desires or his material, what he's gotten from material nature in terms of his body, in terms of his mind, etc., but in a way that he's purified them to serve the Lord, right? So if we go through the translation of the Sanskrit that we spoke through in purport before, King Ambarish first of all engaged his mind on the lotus feet of the Lord Krishna. Then one after another he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hands in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental forms of the Lord, his body in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of smell in smelling the scents of the lotus flowers offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to places of pilgrimage and the temples of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. So that's quite compact, and just from counting we can see that 11 items are mentioned there. All the senses are mentioned there, the mind is mentioned there, the aspect of desire is also mentioned in this translation. So what I'll do right now is just go through each of those items and see how Srila Prabhupada has actually given us the foundations to practice each of those, engaging each of those items into devotional service, into Krishna consciousness. So the first one, the mind. Engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. In Krishna consciousness, in ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada has always emphasized for us to control the mind in such a way that we're always meditating on Krishna. The whole aspect of chanting is not the end means itself. It's the aspect of we develop that relationship with Krishna, with the holy name, such that we can always constantly remember Krishna, his pastimes, his form, his qualities, the holy names itself. So that's the mind. Words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord. The verse that comes to mind here is Nectar Instruction 1, which is Vacha Vegam, Manasa Krodha Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Udarapasta Vegam, Yetam Vegan, Yovishaheta Dira, Prithvim Shashishyat, Etam, okay. I have it. Va Vegam, Udarapasta Vegam, Yetam Vegam, Yovishaheta Dira. Sarvam Prithivam Vichat. Anyway, thank you. So the Vacha Vegam is basically controlling speech. But the aspect of controlling speech in modern times is to basically say, okay, just don't speak anything. Right? Control speech, don't say anything. Somebody's cursing you, don't say anything. Somebody's being pleasant to you, don't say anything. Just don't speak. But we all love to act. We can't stop our speech. At some point in time we will speak because it's going to build up in our mental space. So what has Srila Prabhupada given us? He's given us the concept of that controlling our speech is not about saying nothing. It's about saying nothing mundane. It's about speaking about Krishna, speaking to Krishna's devotees in a form that is conducive to developing their Krishna consciousness as well as ours. So that's the aspect of controlling speech. Second one, or the words, second one is hands in mopping the temple of the Lord. Now, Srila Prabhupada has given us many temples, and Srila Prabhupada's disciples and grand disciples and the devotees and followers of Srila Prabhupada are also looking to build temples. The aspect of temples is not that we come in and just have a social gathering or just come in for prasadam. The aspect here is that we come in, find a place where we can engage, have that sadhu sangha with the devotees, engage in talking about Krishna, but also serving Krishna by doing the same thing that Ambrish Maharaj did, mopping the floors, cleaning the temple, making the temple a place whereby not only would we stay, but would want everybody else to stay as well. Next one is ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord. So I think this is kind of natural, like I'm sitting here giving a speech, everybody's ears are open, right? So Srila Prabhupada has established this whole concept of giving classes, giving lectures, right? The morning program ends with a class. In fact, the morning program itself is based on hearing. From the arti to the japa to the class. We're always hearing. Eyes in seeing the transcendental forms of the Lord. So unfortunately the darshan curtains are closed right now. But once they're open, we can see the Lord. We can see the Lord's lotus feet. We can see what paraphernalia they're wearing. We can see the flower garlands. We can see the type of flute that he's holding, that Krishna is holding. We can see Gauranatai deities. We can see Sitaram Lakshman deities, Hanuman deities. But even around us in the temple, we can already see that actually there's Narsimadev, there's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then there's the Leelas, and then Srila Prabhupada, etc. as well, and the Panchatattva. So it's not just that, oh, the curtains are closed, so now we can't use that aspect of seeing. We can look around us and actually see everything as Krishna's items. And when we get to higher stages, we can even start seeing Krishna within living entities. And the other aspect that Srila Prabhupada has given us is, again, the whole temple sort of atmosphere, which is devotees. It is described that actually seeing devotees is akin to seeing Krishna as well, especially pure devotees. Next one is his body in touching the bodies of the devotees. So I guess from Srila Prabhupada's perspective, this wasn't something he necessarily established per se, but it's something that he would do when he'd greet devotees, etc. He would give them that compassionate hug. He would give them that compassionate exchanges and that loving exchanges. When we meet devotees, even in this day and age, a big thing for our sort of age group is to hug or to fist bump or to handshake, etc. All that is contact of devotees. But again, I come back to the consciousness. Are we doing it in the consciousness that, hey, this is a devotee that I'm appreciating and having interactions with, or this is just another living person that I actually have a nice relationship with, therefore I'm interacting with them? Because if we think about it, all the devotees are the devotees of the Lord, and we should have that same sort of reciprocation with everyone. Next one is sense of smell. In smelling the scents of the lotus flowers offered to the Lord. And this happens even today from Srila Prabhupada. We get the flowers, we see flowers, we offer them to the Lord's lotus feet, and then in the morning program, in the evening program, we get to smell the flowers. Now again, consciousness comes into play. Are we smelling the flowers? These are nice flowers. I don't like this one, but this one over here, this yellow one is really nice. Let me just smell it a bit more, Or are we seeing it as, hang on, these flowers were offered to the lotus feet of Krishna, and that's why they are even more nourishing in terms of the smell. The scent is much more potent. But the reality is that most of us probably aren't able to smell a difference between the flowers that have just been picked versus the flowers that have been offered to the lotus feet. But having that consciousness that, this has been offered to the lotus feet of the Lord can build that sort of consciousness, and over time it can help elevate ourselves and our sense of smell to be purified. Legs and go to places of pilgrimage in the temple of the Lord. So I did read somewhere that actually Srila Prabhupada wanted everybody who lives in the temple to go to Vrindavan I think once a year, I think it was. I don't know if that's correct. So that whole aspect of pilgrimage exists even if you're living at the dam of, like, say, Manor or Soho or whatever temple you're staying in. Srila Prabhupada wanted brahmacharis to go to these places of, like, Vrindavan, Jagannath, Puri, etc., and visit them. And then the whole aspect of visiting temples as well. Most of us live, whilst we're living on the manor grounds, we live away from the temple quarters itself. And we walk to the temple quarters. That in itself, our consciousness, we have to go to morning program, it's 4:30, what am I doing waking up so early? I'd rather just sleep. But hang on a minute. I'm using my legs in service of the Lord because I'm actually walking to the temple, or if we're driving because we don't live at the temple, then I'm still traveling to the temple. Not so that people see that I'm attending Mangal Arati, but so that the Lords can see me and I can see the Lord. Off topic, but there is a little description about Mangal Arati whereby it's described that actually that whole period of the curtains opening and then closing again is, as we know, it's basically just about to be morning in terms of that 4:30 time period. And as we know, Krishna and the gopis have their exchanges during the night times because they can't have them during the day because the gopas are taking Krishna everywhere. So that time period of that Mangal Arati time period is when Radha and Krishna are basically meeting for the final time before they have to depart. And we as followers of Rupa Goswami, we're in that Manjari sort of lineage whereby we actually want to support the gopis and the Manjaris to go, okay, let's be there for Radha Krishna as they depart. We can meditate on that when we're trying to go to the Mangal Arati, that, I'm going there to give them support that, you will see each other again, right? Because once the curtains close, they open again and they're in their daytime clothes and they look so much more elegant, right? And, personal reflection is that I have kind of seen a difference in terms of the mood of Radha Gokulananda when you see them in Mangal period versus, during the Guru Puja and stuff, when the curtains open there. You can actually see that sort of difference. Next one is head in offering obeisance unto the Lord. So there is a pastime with Srila Prabhupada where one of his disciples was like, I don't feel like offering obeisances, like I don't really feel anything. But Srila Prabhupada said, offer it anyway. Why? Because over time, when you offer it, then you'll start getting that feeling of, okay, yes, I understand why I'm offering my obeisances. So again, Srila Prabhupada has established the importance of offering obeisances by offering obeisances, even if you don't feel like offering obeisances. And there's multiple elements to this. When you see somebody respectful, you always offer your obeisances to that person. Usually in this day and age, we just offer it in mind or something like that. But the reality is that when we're offering obeisances, we're actually saying that you're senior to me and I'm completely giving myself to you. I'm surrendering to you and you can kind of give me whatever services that follow. So that aspect is there by showing it externally, by saying, we are going down at your lotus feet. And the lotus feet is where we start looking at all these great personalities as well. We don't look at them face on first. We should always start looking at them from the lotus feet. The last one is desires in executing the mission of the Lord, and I think that is the most difficult one for all of us, whereby we have so many desires in this material world, and sometimes we might even not say, it's okay, it's a desire, and Krishna will take care of it, or I want that big 5-bedroom house. I have no need for 3 bedrooms, but I'm doing it for Krishna. And then what happens? Krishna gets the smallest room, you get the biggest room, your children get the next biggest room, and then the next room is a guest house, which you end up stockpiling anyway, right? So you go from, I'm buying this house for Krishna, to giving Krishna the smallest room. So how much of that house is for Krishna? So how do we actually give our desires through the Lord? And that's where this whole parampara system really takes a big part. Because the aspect of the parampara system, the aspect of a spiritual master, is that we can take our desires to the spiritual master and say, this is kind of what my concept or my ideas of growth in Krishna consciousness, this is what I want to do in Krishna consciousness, or this is my desire in material life, right? Sometimes you don't even have to say it to the spiritual master, but by the fact that you're meditating on it, Krishna reveals to the spiritual master. And then the spiritual master can do many things, and the two prominent things that come to mind is, one is cut you like a sword. Basically put you in situations, give you instructions in such a way that you have to get rid of the desire, or you have to accept that actually spirituality is not so much for you, right? Because ultimately it's an instruction that you do something. Or on the flip side, they will engage that desire in such a way that it becomes Krishna conscious. Even if your mindset was 10% Krishna conscious originally, spiritual master will make it 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and then before you know it, it's a full-on 100% spiritual desire, right? And again, I'll go back to the whole house example, for example. As grihastas, okay, you kind of need a place of residence. You can rent, you can purchase. With rent, you have a lot of headaches with landlords and so on and so forth. With the purchase, it's your place kind of thing. So you could take that desire to the spiritual master and say, or even natural, like, I have a desire to have a house for Krishna. Spiritual master will know. You're going to give the smallest room, maybe not even a room, maybe you just give a shelf in your own room, and then he'll be like, yeah, go for it. And then over time, spiritual master will be like, okay, so you've got a house, invite the devotees over to your home, right? Do some kirtan, do some sangha. And then, yeah, your deities have a small sort of place. Give them a bigger place, Give them a bigger place. Give them a bigger room. So you do that. Then be like, now you're ready for Radha Krishna deities. And then forget all the desires that he had in terms of the house, because serving the lordships at home takes precedence. So over time, gradually over time, that whole desire of